Good morning, class. Today we will start a new topic, towns and traders, from the chapter King, Farmers and Town. So, silent features of this period, you can see from 600 BCE to 600 AD was the emergence of new towns, which led to the growth in trade and commerce. New cities. 6th century BC witnessed the growth of a number of towns in various parts of the subcontinent. Most of these towns such as Patliputra, Varanasi, Kaushambi, Mathura, Ujjain, Vaishali, Takshila, they served as the capital of the Mahajanpads. Major towns. Almost all the major towns, they were located along the routes of communications. Some cities like Pataliputra, they were located on riverine routes, whereas some others such as Ujjain or Ujjaini, they were along the land routes. Some other cities like Puhar were near the coast. Several cities like Mathura, it was the bustling centers of various activities, such as the commercial, the cultural, and political activities. Urban population, elite and craftspersons. Kings and the ruling elites, they lived in fortified cities. It should be kept in mind that as the people live in these areas even today, extensive excavations cannot be conducted at most of the sites. Northern black polished ware, in spite of not being excavated at a large scale, so these sites, they have yielded a wide range of artifacts. So the most significant of these are the fine pottery bowls and dishes with a glossy finish known as northern black polished ware. So on the basis of the finds, the historian, they suggest that the settlements of the people using this ware, it extended from middle Gangetic plain to northern Gangetic plain in the west and up to Malwa in the southwest. So around 450 northern black polished ware, its settlements of the 6th century BC have come to light till date. The scholars are of the opinion that the northern black polished ware were perhaps not used by ordinary people. The availability in the small numbers, it suggests that probably they were used only by rich persons. Ornaments, tools, weapon, vessels, figurines made up of wide range of material such as gold, silver, copper, bronze, ivory, glass, shell and terracotta that have also been found from the northern black polished ware settlements. The finds of all these remains, it revealed that craft of various types were produced in early historical cities. The art of pottery, it became more developed than that of the earlier. The clay bowls, dishes, they were given a glossy finish in order to make them more beautiful and attractive. Undoubtedly, the pottery of this period was more attractive than the Harappan potteries. So there was a growth in the art of ornamentation as well. The introduction of iron, it led to the growth in ironworks. Iron was mainly used for making weapons, hammers, clamp, plowshare and other agricultural implements. And the art of carpentry, it also marched to growth. The carpenters, they made chariot, carts, agricultural tool, boats out of wood. It should be kept in mind that the Harappan people did not know about iron. No iron tools or implement have been found from the Harappan sites. However, several tools and weapons made of iron have been found from early historical towns. Several short votive inscriptions of 2nd century BC have been found in number of cities. So the votive inscription record gifts made to religious institutions. So this is an image found from Mathura and it is an example of the votive inscriptions. As you can see that there is a Prakrit inscriptions on the pedestal of an image of the image. Okay, it mentions that Nagapiya, the wife of a goldsmith named Dharmak, installed this image in a shrine. Guilds or shrenis. A silent features of these inscriptions is that they mention the name of the donor and often his or her occupation as well. So in this inscriptions, we also find mentions of the people living in towns, officials, kings, religious teachers, goldsmith, blacksmith, washing folk, weavers, potters, carpenters. So they also tell us about the guilds or shrenis, organizations of craft producers and merchants. So the traders and the craft person were organized in various guilds or shrenis during the period under considerations. The guilds were very wealthy and mighty organizations that functioned like the modern bank and protected the interest of their members as well. So the guild probably acquired raw materials, regulated production, and marketed the finished product. The guilds also resolved disputes of its members, issued its coins, and made donation to educational institutions, scholars, and to the destitute or the deprived one. We come to know from the inscription of Sanchi Stup that one of its artistic carved gateway was donated by the Guild of the Ivory Workers. Similarly, the inscriptions of the Nasik cave reveals that two guilds of the weavers provided permanent endowment for the maintenance of a temple. So the guild had the right to formulate rules and regulations regarding their professions. Some guilds had grown so powerful that even king could not neglect them. Trade in the subcontinent and beyond. So here you can see the internal as well as the external trade. So there was a substantial growth in trade and commerce during the period. Both internal and external trades, they were in a flourishing state in most part of the India. So students, all the internal cities, as you can see in the map, and the ports, okay, so they were what? Interconnected with a well-knit road system. So several modern national highways, they were developed during this period. As you can see here that if we talk about the modern highway, here you can see two important highways, the Uttarapath and the Dakshinapath. So here you can see the Grand Trunk Road, okay. It was a part of Uttarapath. So this was a part of Uttarapath. Later it was developed by Chandragupta Maurya. In fact, the land and the river routes, okay, they crisscrossed the subcontinent from 6th century BC. So the land route extended into Central Asia and you can see beyond. So the Patliputra here, it was connected by road. So this Patliputra, it was connected by road to Tamra-Lipti. From Tamra-Lipti ships full of commodity, it went to Burma and Sri Lanka. So here you can see that it moved toward other neighboring countries, the commodities. The land route in South India were also developed. As you can see, the land route of Dakshinapath, many routes were connected with land routes. Some of these reached Central Asia and Western Asia. Takshila was connected with Kabul. So this Takshila, it was connected with Kabul by a highway. So here you will see a route went to the Caspian Sea and from there to Black Sea via Bactria. Okay. Another route reached Iran from here you can see Kandahar. So another you can see that reached Iran from Kandahar. And the trader went up to the Mediterranean Sea from Iran. So the discovery of monsoon winds during the 1st century benefited the sea trade. It reduced the distance between the western part of India to the part of Alexandria in Egypt. The whole distance could be covered only in about 40 days with the help of these monsoon winds. So consequently, India's trade with Rome recorded a significant growth both by sea, and here you can see the land route, which was popular as the Silk Route. So the Indian trader would buy silk from China and would sell it to the traders of Roman Empire, thus making a huge profits. So we come to know from the accounts of the Roman historians like Pliny and Ptolemy and the Indian literature both in Tamil and Sanskrit that items like the ivory goods, pearls, black peppers, cloves, varieties of spices, medicinal herbs, sandalwoods, silken and cotton textiles, they were sent to Rome in huge quantity from India, and Roman women liked in particular the beautiful, refined and superior quality of the Indian muslin. The king. So coins occupy a very important place among the archaeological sources here. The study of the coin is known as numismatic. So the earliest coin of India do not have any inscriptions. They bear only symbols on them, as you can see in the images. So these coins are known as punch mark coins. The punch mark coins of silver and copper were the earliest to be minted and used. Symbols were punched or stamped on the metal surface, hence they were named as punch-marked coins. So the punch-marked coins have been found throughout the country, from Takshila to Magad and from Magad to Mysore, and even further south. So the symbol therein could not have been satisfactorily explained. So why these symbols are being used? So the numismatic uh, or the numismatist made attempt to identify the symbols on punched marked coins with specific ruling dynasties, including the Maurya and reached the conclusion that these were issued by the kings. It is also possible that some of these coins had been issued by the merchants, the bankers and the town peoples, as we read that the coins were issued by the guilds. So the Indo-Greek ruler who ruled over the northwestern part of the subcontinent were the first to issue coins bearing the names and images of rulers. So the first gold coin, it was issued by the Kushanas in 1st century. Okay. These coins were identical in weight and shape with those issued by the contemporary Roman emperors and the Persian rulers. So our last numbers of such coins have been found from several sites in the North India and Central Asia. So the widespread use of this gold coin suggests the enormous value of transactions that were taking place. Roman coins have been found in large numbers from several sites of South India. It indicates the close trading connection between India and Rome. As we have already discussed that the earliest coins, they contain only a few symbols, but the later coins, they bear the names of the kings and gods, dates and images on them. They have enabled us to reconstruct the history of several ruling dynasties. So the coin in particular provides us information regarding the achievement and administration of the Indo-Greek kings who came to India from North Afghanistan and ruled here in the 2nd and 1st century BC. So the coins throw significant lights on the economic condition of ancient India. So the largest numbers of coins have been found in post-Mauryan times. They were made of gold, silver, copper, bronze, pottery and leads. Almost all Gupta rulers issued gold coins in large numbers, which indicates that the trade and commerce it flourished in the post-Mauryan period and particularly in Gupta periods. So the availability of a few gold and silver coins in post-Gupta period indicates clearly that trade and commerce it registered a decline during that period. So the coins, they tell us about the extent of the empire, religious condition and cultural growth also during the reign of the concerned rulers. So the Gupta coins, it bearing the image of Vishnu and Garud, suggests that the Gupta ruler were devotee of Vishnu. The lyricist types of coin of Samudragupta, it confirmed that he had a great taste for music. Similarly, his Ashwamedha Prakram coins tell us that he had performed an Ashwamedha Yajna. The silver coin of Chandragupta Vikramaditya confirmed his victory against the Shak rulers because the silver coins were in the circulation only in Western India at that time. So, the artistic Gupta coin, it afforded a clear glimpse of the great taste of the rulers for art and literature. Several Indian gods and goddesses have been depicted on the Kushana coins besides many Persian and Greek deities. The coin of Vimcadephisus, it bears the figure of Shiva standing beside a bull. It indicates that the Kushana ruler were under the Indian influence from the very beginning.